Hey everybody, Dustin Schmidt back here again today. Today I want to talk about the Fuji X100 series of cameras, and specifically the X100V, which is their newest X100 camera that's come out. It's been out for a few years now, and I bought it pretty much exactly when it came out. I managed to get my hands on one. Of course, now from what I can see is that it's back ordered. You can't get it anywhere. It's selling for way over its market price on used sites, all that kind of stuff. So one, I'm not very surprised because I think it's a fantastic camera. It's one of my favorite cameras that I've ever owned. But two, I want to get into what makes this camera kind of special for me and kind of my history with using a lot of these small cameras. So a little bit of my background. I'm a professional photographer and DP based out of Oklahoma City. And so I switch between shooting stills and shooting video quite a bit. And I like to have tools that I can kind of use across both in terms of lenses, for one. I own a lot of Canon EF lenses. And I do that because I can use them on stills cameras and I can also use them on cinema cameras. The EF mount is a mount that transfers across a wide variety of systems. So that's a good buy. I also own some PL lenses, and I own a little bit of some RF lenses because I shoot on the modern Canon system, the Canon RF system. But the Fujifilm cameras are kind of an anomaly in that sense because it's very much a closed system. Fuji lenses are not going to transfer across anything. And I used to own and shoot on a lot of Fuji stuff and sold it all a while back to get back into a more manageable system that I could use across different things like I just talked about. But one thing that I really couldn't get rid of in terms of how I like to shoot is the Fuji X100 series. I've owned most of the Fuji X100 series over the years. I did not own the original, which was still a great camera from what I can tell, but had a lot of quirks and a lot of things going on with it. But I did own, after that, I owned the S, the T, the F, and now the V. And I bought and sold all those cameras at one time or another for a lot of different reasons. I would buy it, shoot on it a bunch. They would come out with the new version, and I would go out and sell the old one to buy the new one. I actually did that for a long time. And then before they came out with the V, I sold the F, and I didn't have a small Fuji X100 body for probably several months. And it was during that time that I really got to kind of miss this camera and what it could do and how I use it. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of that. Now, when you own a lot of other high-end camera systems, I think the tendency could be to always want to shoot on those cameras, to always get the best quality possible. And so I shoot a lot on an R5C, which is a monster of a camera in terms of specs and also kind of body size. It's nowhere near the size of the X100, right? This is a camera you can throw in your pocket and take with you, truly. But it doesn't have the quality that the R5C has. I can't put quite the fancy lenses on this. One, because it's not an interchangeable lens body. It has a fixed lens to it, which is a plus and a minus that we'll talk about. It's also a lot smaller in megapixels. And when you've seen a 45 megapixel file shot on a top end, Canon lens and really kind of blowing that up, it's something really to see. It's a great file. But this is equally good for other reasons. Maybe not technically, but I almost want to say artistically or spiritually, there's something about this camera that I really enjoy. Now, this is not a camera that I use for professional work. I've probably shot some pictures with this for behind the scenes stuff on some professional shoots, but I've never really delivered a file out of this camera to a professional client. And that's not to say that you can't. I know there's plenty of people that do. I think it probably depends on the genre and the industry in which you work. But really where this camera shines for me and where this whole series of cameras has shined for me in the past is for family and personal photos. This is my number one camera that comes out when I'm going out to do anything with my family. Probably 95% of the photos that I have with my family over the last, since the X100 series came out is on this camera. This is my vacation camera. This is my step out to go get groceries camera. This is my birthdays and holidays camera. This is really just kind of like the camera that documents my life, so to speak. And let's get into a little bit of the specifics of this camera and what I think kind of makes it great. So one is the size, right? This is not an exceptionally large camera. And if you keep the lens hood and things off of it, then it gets even smaller, right? So there's the profile. It's very small in profile. You know, the lens is not a giant lens that sticks out a lot. But the amount of utility they've managed to pack into a camera this small is really impressive. And one of the great things specifically again about the V is I think the tilting screen. That was kind of a game changer when they came out from the X100 series for me, and what really made me want to get back into owning one after I had sold my last one. The ability to tilt the screen, you know, like this and use the camera, you know, almost like it's got a waist level finder, means I can shoot from down here and really kind of steal pictures at times, because it kind of seems like you're either reviewing pictures or, you know, people are used to having a camera up to the eye. That's when it really feels like someone's taking a picture of you. So this is kind of nice. It also tilts down. So if I want to take a high angle picture, you know, and shoot down on something, it makes it a lot easier to do that. And that I think is something that, you know, really the old X100 cameras did not have that. They were always fixed, and that made it a lot tougher to do some of what you can do with this camera. It has a hybrid viewfinder. So if you want to really be able to see what's going on around and outside your frame, you can use an optical viewfinder, which this has, or you can switch it over to the digital viewfinder, which is going to give you the preview of whatever film simulation you have on it, all that kind of stuff. Also gives you the ability, you know, when it applies the digital zoom, you can see that in camera. So there's some benefits to that hybrid viewfinder. Although I'll be honest, I typically use the digital viewfinder part of it. Now, I know some people that love the optical part, but I'm almost exclusively on the digital part of it. For being such a small little camera, it's weather sealed, which is really cool. You do have to pick up a couple things. You have to make sure that it has a filter on the front, and that is what kind of helps it become weather sealed. So you have to buy a little extra ring that goes on here, and then you got to put a filter on it. But once you've done that, the whole thing is weather sealed. So that's, I've just got a UV filter on the front here, and I primarily do that for the weather sealing. A couple other nice technical improvements that this camera has. They did upgrade the lens, and it's the first time in the series of the X100 since it started. The last 4 iterations, I believe, all had the exact same 23mm f2 lens. On the X100V, it has a brand new design of the 23mm f2 lens. And it is fantastic. It is sharper, the contrast is better. Everything is kind of just a little bit improved on the last one. And that was kind of a knock on the last camera, was that it just, when it was shot wide open, it was a little soft. It didn't quite resolve as well. And now they have improved that on this camera, which is great. You know, it's got manual everything in a lot of places. So it's got, you know, manual aperture ring. You can switch it over to manual focus. It's got all the dials and things on the top so that you can, if I can focus, there we go. You know, get to exposure compensation or adjust your ISO or your shutter speed. Everything's kind of right there at your fingertips. And so it's kind of that retro vibe too that people really like. When you are shooting with this camera, people will ask you, hey, is that a film camera? I feel like that's getting to be less nowadays. Everybody's kind of figured out that we're in the age of digital, although film's starting to come back. So you still get those questions. And if you like to shoot film, more power to you. I think that is a pretty big hassle nowadays for me. And I'm a little older, so I remember shooting film back in college and things like that, and I would never go back to that personally. This is much better. But that's also kind of where the Fuji shines in terms of the film part of it, right? Because it has all of the infamous Fuji film stocks in the camera. If I want to shoot black and white, I can switch this over to Acros and get an unbelievable black and white photo out of it. If I want to shoot a certain Fujifilm stock like Velvia for landscapes, I can switch over to that. If I want to shoot, classic chrome or any of these things that they've come up with here, all of it is built into the camera and it's a flick of a switch away, which is fantastic. And I think that's the other crazy thing about this camera is that I shoot almost exclusively RAW when I'm shooting professionally. When I'm shooting on the Fuji, I shoot almost exclusively in JPEG. And there's been a handful of times where I feel like that's kind of bitten me, where I wish I had a little bit more of the latitude of the RAW file so I could push it around. And to be fair, this does offer you that ability. You can shoot RAW plus JPEG if you want, and still be able to get the best of both worlds. I just don't really want to deal with multiple files when I'm working with this. I try to get it right in camera and just let the JPEG do what it's going to do. And that's kind of, again, the beautiful thing about this camera and this system. From a technical standpoint, I think this camera can do most of what I need it to do. It doesn't focus or track as well as like my Canons, but I don't feel like I've missed a ton of shots that I would like to get with it. I'm not out shooting like fast moving sports or wildlife or anything like that. It's really just a family camera. And, we have a toddler at home and she moves pretty fast, but it still manages to capture the key moments that I want to get with her. A couple other things that I have on this camera. I like to run it with just the LensMate thumb rest on here. The cool thing about the LensMate thumb rest, it's just got a little hinge on it. So if you need access to some of the buttons, you can just fold it and then fold it back. And I find that that gives me a really good grip on the camera just by doing that and resting my thumb here and wrapping my hand around it. I can hold this camera in a variety of different orientations pretty well without having a really deep grip. The other thing I keep on here is just some little Peak Design holders here so I can throw this on a Peak Design strap. I've just got one of these skinny little Peak Design straps, not one of their big ones, since this is such a light camera. And then that way, when I'm going out with the family and I just want to throw a little something over the shoulder, I can just do that. And I've got a really super low profile camera that I can pop up at any time to grab pictures. So this is kind of my normal go-to for carrying this camera around. Now, like I said, it is a pocketable camera, a truly pocketable camera. I think in the summer, probably not so much if you're just wearing shorts or something like that. But anytime if you've got a jacket pocket, this will fit into a jacket pocket here. So if you don't want to throw it on a strap, you can totally do that and be a little more incognito that way. I didn't want to get too much into the technical aspects of this camera, the focusing system or the video features or things like that. But one thing that is a technical part of this camera that I think is really interesting and super key is that it has a built-in ND filter. And that is something that you do not see on a lot of cameras of this size, almost impossibly. And when you're out shooting in broad daylight and you want to shoot at f2, that ND filter is pretty clutch, that you can throw that on and still shoot and get a really shallow depth of field in kind of broad daylight. And so I think that's a pretty cool and interesting feature of the X100V. Now, there's some additional stuff with this camera that I think is fun that I've used a little in the past, and the longer I've owned the X100V, the more I find myself almost wanting to go back to doing this, which is that they make 2 additional lenses for this, screw-on lenses that expand the capability of this, that really kind of turns this camera kind of into an interchangeable lens camera. You can buy a wide angle adapter and you can buy a telephoto adapter for this camera. So the tele adapter for this converts it to a 50mm full frame equivalent, and the wide angle adapter for this converts it to a 28mm full frame equivalent. This is again a 23mm lens, which equates to around a 35mm full frame equivalent as the camera currently stands. I used to own the wide angle and the tele converter that I use on some of the older systems, and I sold them both when I sold the camera. And I kind of find myself wishing now that I had those back. But one of the cool things that you can do with this camera, and I've done this before and kind of do it pretty often actually, is it has a digital teleconverter. Now really all that's doing is punching in digitally and doing some interpolating and some other stuff, but you can do it in camera. You know, it's the same equivalent to taking the camera in post and kind of zooming into your file, and you could re-interpolate in Photoshop or whatever you want to do. But there's something great about being able to just assign the zoom, the digital zoom to this ring, and being able to just twist this and get a tighter frame. And so sometimes I'll do that. If I want to get just a little tighter, I'm not quite as tight as I want, I'll zoom in camera and get the picture that way. And the zoom in camera, when you use the digital zoom, it goes to a 50 and it goes to 70. So you almost get 3 lenses built in with this lens, which is kind of cool. And again, the pictures are totally usable when you do that. Battery life is pretty good on these. The battery is not an incredibly huge battery. But it does last a decently long time. I don't think this camera draws a ton of power, and they're so small that it's easy to throw a couple extras in a pocket and be able to go out and shoot all day long. I think another great thing about this camera is it really is kind of like the throw it over a shoulder and forget it camera. I'm not as worried about taking this thing out because it is low profile. I don't think it draws as much attention. And this kind of gets banged up and beat up a little bit. You can see here on the front, you know, it's a little dusty, it's a little dirty. The ring on the front here has some nicks and scratches where it's banged into stuff. It's the camera that I take out and I don't worry about it, and I just worry about making pictures. Some have called Fuji the poor man's Leica. I don't know how true that is because I've never owned a Leica. I kind of want to own a Leica. I feel like before I die one day, I should probably buy a Leica so I can figure out what all the fuss is about. I know they make fantastic cameras and lenses. One day maybe. But until then, I really feel like the Fuji X100V is one of the most amazing cameras that you can get for the price. Not even just for the price, for the size, for the features, for the soul that this camera kind of has. Is something special. And if you've never shot with one, you might think that's a little bit overkill. But some of the pictures that I've gotten with this camera are going to stay with me and with my family and, you know, on our walls for decades to come. And I really probably couldn't have done it without the Fuji X100 series and the Fuji X100V. So I can't recommend this camera and this series of cameras enough. It's really, truly one of my favorite cameras of all time. And I'll probably be holding on to the X100V for a long time. At least until they come out with the next iteration that's even better. So, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.